So today I have with me Shaun Brooking. Shaun is a qualified sports scientist with an honours degree in human performance. But actually, Shaun, your background is way more interesting than that. So I'll let you do your intro and tell us what it is that you do and a bit about your background.
Cool. Thanks, Keisha. Thanks for having me here.
Okay.
So, a bit of an interesting journey I've had in the last 5 years. But I'll start back when I did my qualification. So I studied the exercise science and I did the postgrad in human performance at the University of Stellenbosch in South Africa. And I was lucky enough then after that final year to work in the high performance center, which allowed me to work with athletes and in a team situation or dynamic with a multidisciplinary support team. So physios, osteos, nutritionists, exercise physiologists, and basically all the team that really looks after the team in the background, all right? And that's where I fell in love with performance, right? And I was an athlete myself, so I was competing at least for 12 years by then as a swimmer and triathlete. And I really thought I was making an impact with the world of performance. You know, performance could be something you could mirror or imprint into many other areas of your life, which is true, right? But generally, I found now with what I've learned about the nervous system and the brain is that if you focus on one thing, if you're focusing on performance, you're generally only going to get performance, right? Health might not be in that mix, all right? And joint health might not be there. Mobility might not be there because you're so focused on one thing. And towards that last year at university, that's when I retired, as it were, from my sport. And being in that sport taught me a lot of things. It taught me discipline. It taught me how to run structure and how to look after myself in a performance sense, knowing that rest is important and all those things that you need to perform, right? But at the end of the day, it was a time where I was not listening to messages from my body. And performance pushed me through barriers that I probably should have not pushed through. So, I mean, I had bike accidents and I still finished the triathlon, like all that stuff, like just go, you're like a racehorse with the blinkers on. And I mean, you're training a lot of hours and your body goes through a lot. So there's some truth in the matter that you feel healthy and you feel like your body is doing these amazing things. But I was also sold that story of, you're an athlete or you exercise harder, faster, stronger, you keep going. And, it doesn't tell you that you're going to exhaust yourself or burn yourself out. If you have all those things, you are told that you'll have success. You'll have many friends. You'll be successful in business because people like athletes when they employ them, all those things. But they didn't tell me it was going to help my depression or the pain that I was actually running away from. So I was also stuck in an adaptive strategy of addiction. The sport became a place where I could run away from things, right? So when I did quit the sport, I just went cold turkey. So I stopped and I didn't detrain properly, which is what we're kind of winding down that process of being in such high performance state. And my body just broke down. I had excruciating pain. If I did other sports, like I got back into gym, I would do rowing or other bits of sport that my friends did. And I'd actually get really stiff the next day. My shoulder pain got worse. My hips started getting tighter. So I had all these things underlying in my body that actually were there the entire time. But because I did so much sport, there was so much noise in my body and so much load and extra stress that my body was just coping to stay alive with performing, right?
So you were completely disconnected from all of that, and that would have been going on the whole entire time.
Yeah, I was totally disembodied from myself. I was running from a lot of things. I had quite a tough upbringing, like little boys don't cry, emotionally absent type father figures or male figures in my life and all those things, but everyone has that story. Yeah. But we don't realize the impact further on.
Yeah.
Even though it just happens in small doses through our lifetime, you start to become something else, or you need to become something else to fit in, to feel connected to others. Sport was somewhere where I sometimes had friends, right? All of those things. When you're in those stress states, you do things just to cope and survive. And then that actually shields you in some way from your actual authentic self, right? So you're creating all these other strategies externally in your life to manage the pain you feel on the inside. And so your body takes hold on that, right? My adaptive strategy to shield myself from a certain amount of emotional trauma was being held here, was like guarding myself subconsciously. And these patterns start to be, let's say, embedded in our structure over time, not knowing to us that we're showing up like this when we come to a work interview, or we trying to explain ourselves, putting our chest forward, but our body is hanging back. So there's all these things, and even in society, we're told to stop those impulses of sharing who we are.
Yeah.
As a young boy, boys don't cry, pinch your tears in. So boys have tight necks, tight brow lines, diaphragms locked up. All of these strategies to stop the flow or those impulses of what a natural way of expression should be. So your musculature actually learns to do that because you've been told to suppress it somehow. A young girl is told something else in her childhood, and there's an adaptive strategy through that, So yeah, there's all these strategies we take to either help ourselves, but then the external world tells us not to show them, Even the same thing with kids when they don't wash their hands when they come back from the bathroom. Your fingers are going to fall off.
Yeah.
And that's like, it's part of a pattern that the child be like, and then that protective mechanism gets embedded into our neuromusculature, into the body, into our memory. And then therefore that system or that pattern will show up in our lives later on with any amount of stress. The patterns that showed up for me was I didn't know how to control my anger.
So when just with that, so I guess that would have been quite a key sort of wake up moment for you, realizing that you didn't have control over your emotions like anger. That's also suppressing other emotions. But how did you come to that realization is what I'm interested to hear. Like, is it something where there was a certain event where you were just like, holy moly, like what's going on? Or was it something that you were perhaps conscious of, or, on any level?
It's like, then my body started to let me know, like it was screaming, like, you're in pain, help yourself.
Right.
You struggling with relationships. Why am I falling in and out of relationships with people? And I'm always tripping up on the same behavior. People really stimulate my anger response with the slightest thing, just driving. Those are smaller telltale signs, that you're responding in a way that you don't have choice because you only have anger, frustration, sadness. You might only have one option. So there was one moment when I had a complete breakdown mentally, and that was kind of the tipping point, right? And it happened in front of friends, and it wasn't pretty. So all of that, like not feeling loved or cared for in a certain way, that muscular pattern that was holding all of that in, just obviously eroded with the amount of stress I was under, So people around me that loved me and I loved them, they suffered as a result. And then it was like, wow, this is exactly what I don't want. And I don't want to show up like this in my life. So it's time to sort it out. And then the physical breakdown was a couple of years before that. Like it was just over it. And then I met an osteopath who got me on the path of understanding the brain and the nervous system.
That's amazing.
And then after the emotional breakdown, I was like, right, you need to go to therapy.
Yeah. So that's fascinating. So actually the body was communicating this to you way before the mind caught up with what was actually going on. It was that's like anything.
Yeah, in some way, like they're working together. Part of your system is always telling you to be safe, to feel connected, to feel like you're belonging to a tribe or people or a culture. You want to fit in. That's our longing to do that with everyone, wherever we come from, right? To be loved. So those things will then always be, your brain is seeking for that. Yeah. But then the body that's where I felt dissonance when I had fixed or helped my narrative, from the talk therapy, but the shielding, the hip rotating inwards, when I realized my hip and my shoulder were actually protecting me from growing in my business, putting myself on show, these things that I've learned now, like if 5-6 years ago, it would be a different story. I probably wouldn't even be able to share this with you. Yeah, because like, don't show yourself, keep it in, keep all those things in. So we slowly have to unlearn those patterns from the narrative sense, so top down, and then also bottom up. Yeah. So we then find that brain body continuum to start meshing again in some way. And then we can embed new behaviors and patterns into our life. So then they become more effective. And then you have more options, right? Now, when I get my feathers ruffled, I've got lots of options. I can feel anger, but I might not have to express it to this person and say, okay, I really don't understand where you're coming from with this. Is it something I've done, or is it something you've done, right? So then there's a different way of engaging with the world, and relationships are much different now. I take more risks with my work in putting myself out there as a practitioner, right? So you regain a certain amount of confidence in different ways. And if the body was still holding me back in that pattern, I probably wouldn't express my full authenticity or potential there. And that's what's so powerful about this work for people, is that just recognizing, you first draw attention to that, you train your attention, you train your awareness, like, oh, that's something that might actually be holding me back. Well, this is the situation I do this in. That you can then start to align yourself into the things you might be putting off for the rest of your life. So it's hugely powerful work if we connect that continuum again. And that's why I'm so passionate and enthusiastic about it, because it does work. It's yourself, like, transformation work is not easy. Seeing it in your clients and seeing it for yourself, right?
It really isn't. And actually, what you share there, and I'm a massive advocate for working with the body, and that, talking, like you said, can only take you so far. Because the body has this protective mechanism where it only allow you to go so far with it. What was how did that mix work for you? So you said you did a certain amount of talking therapy, and then you added in the body work, and then were you then doing the two together before you transitioned over to just body work, or how did that journey go for you? And I appreciate it could be different for different people.
No, of course, yeah. I kind of reached a threshold where I was getting aware enough, and I was starting to listen to my rhythms and listening what was going through my body in that sense. And when you reach something at that stage, it's like, I can't explain it in any other term. It was just that the sessions became like I was going again in a hamster wheel with the talking, right? Okay, I visited that already, but I'm not feeling I can do any more there, but I do feel something different here. Right. And then that played up in other areas of my life as well. Like, I was like, okay, I'm still getting tripped up there. I'm still not feeling confident here. Why haven't I attended to this progress that I want to make, but I still can't just change that behavior that makes me feel more confident to do XYZ with reaching out to more practitioners, right? So then that's when I went on the deeper hunt for the body practice. So I gave the talk therapy a complete rest.
Right.
Yeah. And which is also important to recognize for your listeners as well, is that when we do something, we really have to focus on that thing. We have to give the brain and the body a very specific target. Otherwise, our nervous system and our brain won't learn, because if we're doing, let's say we have a client and we're working together, I want to know how far in the process they are with you, because we don't want to introduce more noise into the system, because if we add more pressure to the person or the stress to the person, that pattern could emerge again. And then we're actually embedding it more, right? So that's why I took the break and then said, okay, what needs to happen? And then I found body practitioners, somatic practitioners that could help me integrate again with something different. And that's how I kind of layered into that practice. And I've stayed mainly with the somatic practice now for myself, and found different types of energetic psychotherapy to help with that as well.
Excellent. I hear words like somatic experiencing, and the other one I hear is embodied work and stuff like that. Are there differences between these things, and how would you describe the work that you do?
Yeah. So there is nuance between all three of those practices. I'd say movement coaching is another form of understanding your physical practice from a different lens, in the sense that exercise exercise can be a tiny piece of movement in the iceberg, right? But movement is many things. Yeah. So we don't realize that we are a body and we show up as a body in many areas of our life, not just when we're moving or exercising, right? So a lot of the time I'll work with someone that is starting to recognize that exercise is leading them somewhere where they're not getting the results they want. They're more stressed. They're not sleeping well. So movement coaching addresses the whole person in that approach. And we look at how you actually move through your life, right? I want to know how you live. I want to know how you sit. I want to know how you sleep. Because all these other positions your body is moving through life could be having an effect on your total movement capacity. All right. So yes, we're going to need to integrate more movement in the sense that we need to grow your expansion other than just doing robot movements like in the gym, right? So you need to kind of expand the practice, and that's what movement practice will do. And then it also looks at how you fit into your ecosystem as a moving body, right? So does your work life add stress to your movement capacity, right? How can we readjust there, right? And then once the brain and the nervous system start to learn more movement patterns, slowly then behavior can change. All right. So that's basically looking at movement coaching in a different physical practice.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit more, let's say, in-depth and more looking at the whole person, right? And that's something I've kind of developed in my sense of what I understand movement coaching is. I've been through the performance worlds. I've done the strength and conditioning. I've done Pilates. I've done rehab. I've done clinical practice stuff. And that's something I've blended together to call it movement coaching, right? And showing you that you and your body are more than just exercising, or you're not actually seeing your body in a sense that you are connected to it in some way, and you're connected to your body whilst moving through your environment.
Yeah.
So it's more of the physical practice. Somatic Experiencing is designed by someone called Peter Levin, and he is more based on trauma. So parts of those trauma patterns that might have come from huge life experiences, all right? And lots of history that lives in the body that might not be yours as well through generational trauma. Yeah, so that type of modality is very focused on a trauma lens, I would say. And then you starting to rewire those adaptive strategies like addictions or strong bouts of anger and frustration at menial type things in your life. You're looking at deep rooted history and trauma in the body, and you're trying to reintegrate that into living well. Yeah. So the training that I've done is somatic type coaching, and that's an embodied body type coaching process that takes you through a transformation through the body. So we generally are trauma sensitive coaches, right? So we'll know when to spot trauma, and then that'll have to be dealt with a specific type of trauma specialist. Right. But we are sensitive in the fact that we're paying attention to those signs of trauma. And if trauma does start to come out or show itself in the session, we're not trying to move the person quickly away from it, because then again, you could create more trauma response. So we embed those adaptive strategies or behaviors that they're not coping well with, integrating in their life. They could be hardened or more rigid in the system, right? So we want to just introduce a lot of safety into their system whilst doing that type of coaching.
Excellent. So you're saying that you'll see signs of trauma or that trauma response in a person when you're working with them, and it's not you're noticing that, and that you're not trying to do something with it or particularly move the person through it. You're noticing that, and you're helping them to sort of tolerate and be in that space. Would you say?
Yeah. There's a really good way of, like, if trauma shows itself, right, or if we're in any amount of pain in our life, whether it be emotional or physical pain, we're going to start to adapt in moving around or with that in a way that we don't want to experience those ouchy or weird feelings, right? And that's what I did. I bottled them in and down. Yeah. What we want to do is we want to actually meet them and make friends with them. So we're always moving through and with, but we're not pushing against. Because if we push against, we actually create more stress. And what does our system do? In a safety sense, it locks down for safety. And then those adaptive strategies become the go-to response.
Yeah.
So we want to move away from that gently and always move through and with, which is hard. It's really hard to do that. Like, you tell someone we're going to go with this now, they're like, well, I don't really want to go there. But
I've been trying to avoid this the whole time.
Exactly, yeah. And that's, that adaptive strategy could be wanting to avoid it the whole time, just as a basic sense, right? But we've got to create that safe space for people to come in there and experience it in a healthy way. And then we're going to move with it and through it. And the biggest thing is if no one asks permission to do that, if the practitioner doesn't ask permission, exit now.
Yeah.
Basically, just like, this is happening and you should be aware of it, and the practitioner should hold you there and say, like, this is, if we want to go this way, and I inform you that it's happening in a safe way, so we can ground the person and help them understand that it's a normal response. Like, this is your body telling you how to be safe, right? We normalize that biology and that psychology straight away. We don't say that it's abnormal in any way, shape, or form.
And that's really powerful, because I think most people wouldn't have had that experience of somebody actually being able to sort of hold a mirror up and actually saying, this is what's happening for you right now. And, that asking permission, like you said, to actually, to do that piece of work.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the course that I'm on now, and the one person was brave enough to come on for a live demo.
Oh, wow.
And she vouched that she had quite a bit of trauma and she's dealing with it, and she got triggered last week at the last session. And her first experience of someone helping her with this trauma was, it's a interesting somatic practice where you have a stick and you beat a cushion, right? And she was she was invited into the room, and this was the only practice she was offered without being told it was going to happen, in a room with strangers. And I mean, even feeling comfortable, not comfortable wanting to share that experience, right? She didn't have the choice. And it obviously made things worse. It embedded those adaptive strategies more, and she didn't come out transformed or having learned something about herself in that experience at all. Yeah. So the dangers are there. If it's something you don't want to involve yourself in, know that it's your body and you that can say no, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the times we also think that we're at the mercy of a medical system or something like that. And a lot of the work with the somatic work as well is that once you listen to your body, you know that your body's saying no to something. And then you have a choice. Yeah. You might have the choice to back out and get a second opinion, or you're just not actually feeling comfortable in the situation. And then you'll be able to step back and reassess and go somewhere else. That's what's hugely powerful as well. Like, I came out of the talk therapy and I came out of the somatic work, and it was this deep, unwavering trust you develop within yourself, right? And so many things just become so much more clearer then. The choices you make, you obviously we second guess ourselves every now and again, but you just have more behind you, and you resource yourself much more. And you can make choices that become really good for yourself in a subconscious way now. And then you get to experience more of life, right? I wanted to feel the weather. I wanted to feel in rhythm with nature again. I wanted to feel all those other things. And I think with the somatic work is that people then start to, like, a lot of people say, I just want to be in nature all the time. Like, all these things start opening up. Like, I've started walking every morning because that's what I felt like I wanted to do. And we just listen to that rhythm again. And slowly from that, if you really long for something or you want to get somewhere, that process and that practice in getting there will feel a lot easier, and it won't weigh you down as much, or you'll second guess yourself a lot less, So there's huge power and potential in what it can do outside of the practice for you.
Yeah. And I like that, what you're saying there about that sort of trust in the body, and being able to have that open dialogue with the body as well, because I know for sure a lot of the work that I do, particularly with clients who suffering from eating disorder and disordered eating, they do not trust their body. They have zero trust. They don't know what they feel that the body's out to get them and it's working against them. And actually, how wonderful must it be to know that you can have a relationship with your body where it tells you almost, what we're up to today. And
what your body then can do is, like, let's say we look at anxiety and excitement as two energetic emotions in the body. All right. We kind of say they're in and up, right? But they're two opposing ones. So if you're going in and up excitement and you're wired for anxiety, your brain and body could be like, oh, am I anxious again? And that pattern then reemerges itself, right? So you could be excited about your job promotion, but everyone around you is seeing anxiety, right? So we want to create nuance in the system where your brain and your body say, oh, this is good excitement, and this is the type of muscular pattern and relaxation and breath that comes with that. And this is anxiety, when I actually need to be aroused to keep safe. Maybe someone's making me feel anxious, or I'm anxious about I left the washing in the washer and I'm going on a 6-week holiday or whatever, some example. But
you said that made me very anxious.
Moldy washing, eh?
But that's interesting what you say about that because I've always wanted to sort of understand that, this idea between being excited and being anxious, and how that can be, it can feel very much the same, can't it? I mean, it's the same, I guess, physiological response that's going on in the body, but then what is actually really what's actually really happening there are two different things.
And depending on our baseline or our history or our patterning through the years up until now, your body's going to recognize that as either, I hate to use the word bad, but either going to be good or effective response, right? So imagine a leader that was excited about presenting something, and everyone around him, everyone's nervous system is like, we're all reading each other subconsciously, naturally. It's happening now, even here with you and I. There's something in the background that our brain and body is doing subconsciously to keep us safe, right? And everyone around in the boardroom is like, why is he so stiff and looking anxious? But he's expressing something maybe that he might be excited about. So then we don't receive that information or that person in an effective way. He might not be an embodied leader in the sense of showing his excitement or his passion for his product or his craft, or mobilizing his team to get going with something. Like, is he sure about that? He seemed quite anxious, right?
Yeah, that resonates with me so much. My corporate days, I was always, you can always see, you can hear what someone's saying, but you can often see that their body's telling a very different story, and you're not sold. You're just you're sort of not sure if I bought that. You kind of ask your colleagues, did you see the way you fiddled with the paper? You do pick up on it.
And that's exactly it. That's it in action, right? That's what you'll see. And you felt what he said. You didn't hear what he said.
I guess I'm sort of thinking about parents and who you grew up around and how they manage their own emotions and anxiety, and how, as a kid, not even aware of the world or yourself really yet, how that gets stored within your own body.
Imprinting for sure. I'll put my family on the spot with my sister and my 2 little nephews. She's quite a worrywart, like very anxious, very upward driven energy, and making sure everything's clean, no bugs, like constantly caring, right? And I can see that in the firstborn, right? He's really anxious around new people. He's really anxious with things not being in a particular way. One of his toy trucks got stuck under the wheel of the car when he was playing outside. And the video my sister sent, it was like literally he was screaming blue murder because he couldn't get the car out. And that's anxiety provoking. That's the level that somehow has subconsciously embedded through my sister's anxiety response into him. And when he was a baby, I would hold him on one arm and I'd look at him and he would be like chest tight eyes, and like he's just really observing me, like, am I a danger to you? Right. And his whole body is like reacting to this. Like he literally went stiff as a board.
Wow.
So yeah, parents, I think we don't realize that how much this is actually happening in the background for all of us. And obviously in those critical learning stages when a child is very young, um, there's a lot of that going on. The blueprint we have is from our parents and from their parents. It's
Yeah.
like all this, we're bodies from bodies as well, so that adds to our overall way of being when we reach an age when we leave home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's something I've been sort of learning about myself as I was learning, a lot of the work that I do on myself at the moment is racial trauma, how we get taught that certain situations and certain people aren't safe. I'll put my family on the line here. One of the things that my mum often says, if I go to a country, I say, oh, Mum, I'm going off to Budapest next week. First thing she says to me, aren't they racist there? So that would be the first. So then I go there thinking that's a ridiculous thing to say, but you go there trying to make sure that no one's being racist right now, which is how do you do that really? It's really on holiday, we're supposed to be relaxing. So it's that thing where it is just passed down, but she's got that from somewhere, and etc. So it is that thing where and that was verbal, but you also got these sort of cues where there would have been situations, I'm sure, then where she would be in certain situations and certain environments where she wouldn't have felt safe. And I would have picked up on that as well. But I just found that very, very interesting, in sort of how lots of dots started to connect up for me. After my own sort of physical reaction to stuff that I seen in the news. Pretty tough, but really interesting.
Yeah, and even just sitting there watching something from afar, hey, even though that history is still within us, and now you're experiencing those emotions as totally real, as if the event was happening right in front of you, which it was in some respects, right?
Yeah.
Did you have a chat with your mom in respect to, does she have the same sensation or feeling?
Funny enough, it's so my I would say the other thing that I'll definitely get into at some point on this channel is how generally within the Black community we don't talk about mental health, we don't really talk about trauma, and I would say that would be very true within my family. But I think that is something that somebody's got to sort of initiate that change. So I would talk about it openly with my sister, for example, and we talked about it a lot. She had a lot of support from her on the phone, but in terms of speaking to my mum about it, I actually haven't yet. And it'd be interesting to see what her it would be interesting to see what her response would be, but I can almost imagine that it would be sort of quite a disconnected, like, no, it was really sad, but sort of like not really able to sort of communicate what was going on for her physically. I can imagine it could be very much like it was really sad, and I can't, and rage and all the natural sort of emotions, but how connected to what that physiological response would have been for her, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's an interesting time with understanding those deeper embedded generational behaviors for all of us in how to do this the right way forward right now, and how we can all kind of meet each other from that place as well. But we hear each other from those, let's say, avenues, rather than, okay, this is my point, this is your point. And the body, you still have to arrive as a body. And is my brain and body saying the right message? Like, say if I came into the room and I was heightened alert for that interaction or having a conversation, just like we said with the CEO, with his team, other people would receive my body and my response maybe in a negative way. So I think for me as well, during that time, it was a lot of stuff I had to sit back with and just say, wow, this is something I need to look back there for, to first understand that and then come into the meeting of it. Yeah.
Quite blessed in that sense, in that, this is talked about a lot more. It's not so still taboo, but not
exactly. Yeah. And changing those filters for people is hard. I have a lot of older clients as well that struggle with mobility issues and things like that. And to try and understand behavior and how hardwired that patterning or way of thinking or seeing the world is, it takes a lot for someone to actually step back from that. to just be in that mode all the time, for sure. And that's why I said with the trauma thing as well, it's like we got to come in with compassion.
Yeah.
We can't come in with all guns blazing and, trying to change everything so quickly. And that's also a good point, is like, if we do try change everything quickly, a lot of things would collapse, right? If we just want to do a complete 180, we see that in the body as well. Like if we put too much change on the body, just like the pressure that woman had in that class or that therapy session she was going to, the body would shut down again, and there we would go back to our old patterns and behaviors. So when we were talking about previous history and race and everything, like I get very, because I haven't trained those muscles yet to be aware of all those things and want to care for someone, whoever I'm having the conversation with. So my voice would get short and low.
Yeah.
And you'd generally see some people get really high pitched or they'd get really crackly, like they've got a throat infection or something. Just small changes in tone and texture of the voice is a big telltale sign that they might be sharing something that they're not comfortable with, or they're not comfortable sharing yet. And then you can just slowly kind of back off and reground, or just come back to a centering practice if it were.
It's interesting what you said about the voice, actually, because one of the things, like, it took me a long time to start to talk about, I never talked about my race. Imagine I never talked about my race, and then suddenly there was this focus on my race. And at some point, it took me ages. A lot of conversations going on sort of behind, this is, me not wanting to share with, my audience at this point. I was having lots of conversations with friends and just saying, I feel really stuck and not able to say anything about it. But as soon as I started speaking out about it, I was like, I don't know if I'm into chakras and stuff like that, but I felt like something unlocked here. It felt different, like physically different here. And I was like, I felt like something opened up. That's the only way I can really describe it. It just felt like it opened up. And then it was, I didn't care. Like before, it was like, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I offend somebody? People pleasing is something I constantly have to work on. So what if I offend someone? What if I, don't talk about my own race properly? As if. So it was this whole thing where I was just like, oh, and then as soon as I was just like, sod it, I'm just going to say it.
Yeah.
I'm up for making mistakes. I'm up for being, corrected and all the rest of it. Like, this is what I know. This is my truth right now.
Yeah.
It was just from there, lots of things changed for me.
But yeah, and that's beautiful. Like you recognize that, and it's like, wow, something about my truth came out there. Or you just let me know if I'm speaking out of turn. It's like you almost became embodied in the sense of who you were and who you are, and accepting all that parts of you. And then that all came out in a beautiful way. And you recognize that something had lifted. Your voice changed, or you actually felt the physical release.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely release is the right word.
Yeah, yeah. What you felt you might have need to keep in check,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a whole, I could go into how much I had to need to keep things in check, but that's a huge part of, what I was dealing with in not talking about my race, in not, trying to sort of, that internalized racism that I've had to work through and battle with, just sort of like, oh, I don't want to say certain things, I don't want to be too black, and all of that. So you feel like you have to, and then suddenly it's just like, what does that even mean? You just think, you open up and you just think, well, I am who I am. And people either going to like it or lump it. And I'm definitely not here to please everybody.
Wow, yeah. Acceptance, amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
So in terms of sort of working with the body, you said so. I had the privilege of attending your workshop. Was that last week? It feels. Was that last
Monday? I think.
Was that yes, last Monday evening you ran a webinar. You got a workshop webinar about what was it called? The semantics of somatics. Am I saying?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. And one of the opening sort of questions that you talked about was why the body?
Yes.
And why we couldn't solve all of our problems from you explained it as this half of our body, and I think of it as sort of the neck up. So why the body?
Yeah. So the body, like I said, let's look at those behavioral examples I used before. Those adaptive strategies that I've developed over time. So not speaking up, not showing up in a certain way, shielding myself from something. Okay. That then gets embedded into our system subconsciously. All right. So you're doing this without even feeling it. It might have happened at the time of its inception, that it was a jolt or something, right? But your brain is very efficient in wanting to save space up here. All right. So it doesn't want to have to always remember to do that. So part of your memory is now becoming a reflex. All right. So once it's a reflex, the brain doesn't consciously have to always do it. Yeah. So that's in itself, it's a pro and a con, right? So if that adaptive strategy, like we've described earlier, is helping us or not being so helpful in our later life, right? So I believe that where those patterns and those behaviors exist, they're already reflexive, so they exist within the body.
Right.
And I think I use an example of my cleaner rearranging my shower gel and my shampoo. So that's basically it in action, right? My shampoo was in a certain spot. I could go there with my eyes closed, right, and get the solution I needed. But then she switched them around. So I kept getting the wrong one for the wrong thing. And it took me a couple of weeks just to recorrect it because my hand instinctively even just went to that same spot. I was like, no, come back. So there is a bit of conscious effort in having to change that behavior or pattern when you become aware of it, right? And through awareness and attention training of the body and the sensations and the things that move within us, so vibrations, pulsations, just feeling your body for feeling your body, can be quite an unnerving experience for someone that hasn't felt that before, right? So with that awareness training we do in the beginning around centering, around orienting, that's you starting to develop your literacy or your awareness or your capacity to then tune into those impulses, right? If I didn't know I was doing that, screaming and shouting at people the whole time, that impulse to protect myself and defend myself all the time, even if someone's just asking me to pass the milk, right? I would have to understand what that impulse is first. Yeah. And that comes from the body. It's reflexive by the time it's already happening without us knowing we can stop it. Yeah. So that's why I say, why the body? And the second part is the history that lives there, right? I've had people walk around the room, or I know there's something going on with the hip or the shoulder, and then I just help them mobilize and we start doing stuff in that area. And then all of a sudden the story comes out. Oh yeah, I had that bike accident when I was a kid, and I did sprain this ankle when I was a child, and I never had proper rehab or whatever. Or there's a scar there, right? Scars are highly neurologically dense in the sense that they actually start to create blocks in your neural signaling through areas. So if I had a scar, I had a tattoo on my calf muscle many years ago, and then all of a sudden this knee problem developed because the scar tissue wasn't allowing the signals to pass through the scar tissue. So my knee was having a bit of a wobble. My brain couldn't make sense of the information coming up from that tissue because there was a scar there. So it's almost like the brain has the software to update now that the body is now saying something different, right? Yeah.
That's really interesting about scar tissue, because then my mind goes to the many women, for example, who've had C-sections, and actually how deep that scarring can go. And I've seen a lot of issues where the muscle doesn't actually quite, it gets stuck, doesn't it? It sort of there's an adhesion there.
Yeah.
And so and how the body has to sort of compensate for that. Often see happen with the lower back, but I guess it could go anywhere, couldn't it?
It could, yeah. And that's, you've described like lower back's usually an issue. They have pelvic floor issues, front of the hips, everything kind of feels just out of sorts. And that's the information, let's say the feedback loop that's blocked now because of the scar. And, when we broke a bone, the tissue hardens again, stronger than it was before, because it like, oh, I don't want to, it's compromised. So I get this, it breaks, and then there's a lump around the bone tissue that's made it stronger than it was before. So it doesn't have that issue again. Same thing with tissue, is that the fibers line up again, but then it hardens to protect, right? So the scar becomes slightly more dense, and that affects mobility going forward, pain. You might find other things going up and down the body because of that scar,
And what about sort of you talked about you had injuries with shoulder rotation to the hip. How do you ever see sort of when somebody's working through and I don't know if we already touched on this, so when somebody's working through sort of old patterns of trauma, how certain injuries can flare up again and come back even if they have been gone for ages now?
Yeah, that's quite a common theme. Let's say you have had some of your joints or your tissues compromised through your lifetime, right? And then you start doing some trauma work or somatic work, or something creeps up in your future, right? The body then will generally go for that spot again in terms of letting you know what's going on, all right? So I use an example of one of the moms I was working with, and she had 2 kids, training to be a yoga instructor. All of a sudden her husband's work changed, and now there's a life transition has come into her view, like uprooting the family again, we're moving to another country, all right? And she came to me for shoulder and knee issues from many years of running and yoga practice. So that was all fine, it was all sorted. But when this life transition landed in her lap again, those little wobbles and niggles that came back, they came back to the same spot, right? It was almost though the body was, okay, here's a warning sign, all right? Amount of stress, lack of sleep, maybe, when you're in that state of a little bit of stress, then exercise and movement can become more stressful to you, even though it is a good stress. But if your baseline is already stressful, you're just going to be more stressed after that, And that can push your nervous system into deeper layers of the stress response, and we call that dysregulation. And you can then get stuck in that loop of being on edge all the time or ready to go with everything. And then that affects your digestion, as you would probably know as well. Your ability to kind of transform or heal a little bit through your injuries. Inflammation is high. You're not digesting your food properly. You're probably craving sugar and things like that a lot more because your body and your brain are like, I need energy to sustain this state.
Yeah. And actually that's an interesting point, sort of that how some people respond to that energy in wanting to then exert more energy. So I see that a lot of people, hitting the treadmill or going off for a run because there's this sort of this feeling within their bodies, but actually, like you say, their baseline of stress is already quite high, and they're adding more load onto that, and just
and it's kind of it's a double-edged sword with this one, because energetically your body's telling you to release the stress, and we were also told many years ago, blow off some steam, do that whole thing. But if we can reset your nervous system a little bit, you know you're in a stressful situation, and I don't want to feel all revved up when I go to exercise. Let's do some centering practice or orienting practice, and then involve yourself with some exercise. So you kind of regulate yourself first and then go into exercise, which is really easy to do with the practices we might get to today. And then it becomes more beneficial for your body. But it's then also the trick with, we briefly touched on why people use that then as like an addiction cycle. Right? So your body's going up into that fight or flight, it's getting revved up into the red zone. And then what happens is they do the high intensity work, or they hit the treadmill, or they go to CrossFit or whatever. And then they get this big dose of like, oh, I feel great. And it's just like the hit, I've got a good hit. And then by the time they get home, they might be crashing already. And then tomorrow they're like craving that next hit of feeling good just for that moment. And then slowly that cycle takes over.
Yeah, that is so beautifully put, because that is what I hear. But I need it because it makes me feel good. But that very short amount of time. But that's the only experience that they have of feeling good because they feel so bad all that time. And it's kind of that hit, like you say, gets quite addictive, and the person just gets stuck in that loop, and it's exhausting, and it's so taxing. It's a hugely catabolic process as well.
Oh yeah.
Which from a performance perspective is quite interesting, because if a person, if this whether you're performance based or not, but thinking about performance for a second here, if a person is looking to make adaptations in their training, get faster, get stronger, and all the rest of it, how counterproductive that behavior is.
Yeah. And the classic example is, like you said, a good word there, catabolic. Like your systems are eating themselves, basically, in a sense. And a lot of the time when I was competing, like I'll show you photos, but I was like really, really skinny, like bones, like endurance athlete. And I got really good at sprinting for some reason. I don't know why, and then all the coaches like, you got to bulk up now. You got to do this like heavy lifting. And I was about 16 or 17 at the time. And I couldn't gain weight. I couldn't gain muscle because that background stress system was in overdrive. And even just looking back, like the amount of food you eat in that state as well, right? Just to keep that system going. You might not even be that physically active, but there was no way in hell that I was going to actually get any muscle tissue, because I was just on that loop all the time through that stress. So I didn't have time to actually repair and build.
Wow.
Yeah. And
at such a young age as well, such a key sort of developmental age as well for you. You would have been growing this way.
Yeah. Somehow I think when you said that now, it was like, because I really shot up towards the end of primary school, and I was really tall for my age. And then from then on, I didn't grow anymore. So I just stopped playing rugby because everyone was going to crunch me, basically. and everyone else then, they caught up, but then they still went, So I never thought about it like that. It just actually stunts a lot of things.
Yeah, but there's only so much energy that you've got to play with. And the body's like, what's vital here? That I grow enough feet, or that I preserve my cardiac muscle, my skeletal muscle, my bones, and all the rest of it. So
yeah, very true. Yeah, and it just shows you how delicate that system is, and we need to really, I think part of us as being practitioners, we really have to just help people understand that in a really compassionate way, and just say, like, this is how you can help yourself, and this is how we're not helping ourselves in one way, shape, or form. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm itching because I really want to do some practice with you now.
Yeah.
So if there was, and I think a really good example that you gave was sort of you're about to go into a stressful meeting or something like that. Well, I guess one of the things that my clients might come away from is sometimes when they come out of a session with me, which could be quite tough, we go into stuff and we're challenging, behaviors and patterns that they're trying to let go of and that have been keeping them safe, can often feel quite raw afterwards. So what would be sort of a nice sort of centering practice that a person could try for, just sort of calm and...
Okay. Sure. Yeah. I think the easiest ones would be a little bit of the orienting and a little bit of the body scan or the centering practice together, which are really powerful and effective kind of on the mark. Or you could do that centering practice. No one will know you're even doing it. Right? So like I said, you can fit it into while you're walking for the bus, while you're sitting on the bus, while you're walking around the street, just, or you're walking in nature. You can always be aligning yourself, and the key takeaway here is that you want to practice these practices, yes, before you need them for something, but the practice is when you might not need them, right? And that's the hardest thing. So say all hell breaks loose and things become chaotic at home or meetings don't go well and you're already in a stressed state, you're not going to think about doing the practice then. Right? So it's almost as though you want the practice to be done when you're feeling good and your body's in a space to learn and you're not stressed. So then when you do become, you are faced with stress, or you are in a stressful situation, and you start centering just subconsciously. Remember, we want that practice to become a learned behavior. Yeah. Then your body just kicks into that. And then all of a sudden the stressful situation doesn't feel so stressful anymore. And that's why if like the practice, we always do the orienting, we always do the body scan. And everyone's like, why do you keep doing it? It's like, you've got to embed it in your structure, in your neuromuscular patterning. It's got to become a learned behavior. Otherwise, when the fire's there, we ain't going to think about
what I'm going to do. It's going to steam up.
But the world is burning. Yeah. So it's always important to practice things from a healthy space, and that's what Western culture, I think, is. It's always reactive. Something's wrong, let's quickly fix it. But if we look at these practices, they should be hopefully done from a place of, let's say, groundedness or openness, and when you actually have time to practice them without the stress.
Nice.
Yeah.
Do you think we could do a little?
Cool. Yeah. All right. So these ones you can do seated or standing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We're both seated, so that's fine. Are your feet flat on the floor?
They are now.
So you can have your shoes on or off. It's up to you. Yeah. So also, if you're outside as well, it's really good to connect with grass and things like that. But as long as you have no barrier between skin and surface, basically, it's always good. All right. So we'll start with the orienting. And this one you don't really have to do in front of people, but you can when you're alone. All right. And it's important to just orient in the room you're in. So you're kind of just scanning the room. And we want our neck to turn as well. So we're now starting to basically just welcome the space we're in.
Mm-hmm.
And with orienting, like we're looking behind us as well, just knowing that there's no saber-toothed tiger. So there's actually no threat. That's what we're telling our body. There's no threat. We're just in our room or in our kitchen or wherever we are. And you can almost just feel you're distracting your brain, or that switch to anxiety. It's just slowly starting to drop down. All right. And then we'll always do orienting. So we'll work from the outside in. We don't just go straight for the body, right? Just in case. And then basically now what we can do is we can just start to familiarize ourselves with a bit of sensation. So you can rub your knees. Yeah. And you're just sensing kind of the connection of your palm to the fabric of your clothing, or if you've got shorts on or anything like that. So you're just paying attention to sensation. All right. And whilst you're practicing, just be aware of if anything overstimulating or uncomfortable or overwhelming happens. Yeah, you can always stop and go back to orienting. Yeah, just kind of a safety switch. Good, doing okay?
Yeah, good.
Good. And then you can kind of just sit and observe that you feel your knees more. So we're trying to increase your somatic awareness around just sensation or feeling what we call the aliveness of the body. And then I can draw your attention to your seat, so how you connect it to the chair, and how your feet are connected to the floor. Good. Doing okay? Good. And then we take it a step further now, and we're going to work through a few dimensions of the body. So the first one we'll go through is our length. Yeah. So we can notice that from our pelvis, we grow a little bit taller through the crown of the head. And you're just noticing your length. You become aware of your spine. And in this practice, you're allowed to move. Like I just do little micro movements. You're like, okay, now I can feel my spine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I generally start at the back because we always live in the front. Everything's always here. Yeah. And sometimes we forget about our back, the poor old back.
So important as well.
Yeah. So I'll start from...
You said that, I felt myself move back and actually helps breathe better.
Yeah, you kind of sat back into it, hey?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and then when you're resting there, nice, and you said your breath changed, but kind of became longer. So you're paying attention now, just maybe your breath goes deeper down into your pelvis. Yeah, and you notice more of the length of your spine and your shoulder blades. Yeah. How they just rest on your rib cage. Yeah. Noticing the length of the neck and just how your head is resting on top. You can always just check the quality of movement there. You might feel tension, and all of these sensations are normal, meaning that you might feel tension, you might feel softness, you might feel temperature, you might feel the breath pulsating, vibration. And then just in your general sense of awareness, in your length, notice what gravity feels like. It's ever present, but do we check in with that? Yeah. I feel quite heavy in like a pull in my mid back. I don't know if you notice anything.
I feel sort of a time, like every now and again I feel I can't explain it, but my right side of my pelvis is just talking to me, which I hadn't noticed before.
Huh.
Kind of feels a bit glitchy.
Okay. And yeah, all we're doing is noticing now. We're not trying to control or manage the sensations. So that's a good point to, I'll ask you sometimes, what's the first thing that jumps into your attention? It might have been your hip. Yeah. And what's the first thing that jumps into your attention about gravity? Okay. It took you somewhere. Do we notice that change? Do we notice what happens when we change our attention to that? Yeah. There was a physical change for you, so you kind of maybe leant back with that length. The breath felt different. And then we learn from that change, right? I might breathe better back here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we're going to work into our width, so east to west. So it's almost like we're tracing an outline through the ears, through the shoulders, noticing your edges, yeah? Noticing the sides of your ribs. And I also invite you, if you need to and want to, you can start to map out. You can use your hands, like breathing sideways for me is quite a thing. It's quite an issue.
Larty's breathing now.
Yeah.
We're breathing.
And then you can also kind of feel the groundedness of the outside of the thighs. And let's just take a breath in our width. So we're occupying our width and our length. And one last one. We're going to move from the back of the body through the internal landscape. Right? So you can kind of use your mind's eye to scan like a photocopy machine or something, going through the ribs, through the chest. Maybe you notice your abdomen, maybe notice your hip again. And this is our depth. Yeah. Coming through the front of the chest, maybe. So anything that jumps into your attention. So part of this orienting or centering practice is training your skill of attention, right? What are we noticing? And now we can take a nice deep breath in all of our dimensions. So length, width, and depth. Like I'm noticing a temperature change when I do that.
I wasn't aware of the air on my arms, but now I'm very aware of sort of, all of my body, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so your contact to your nearby environment, eh? Yeah, and that's just it, like just noticing that, I'm actually in contact with the air that's nearby me as a body, right? And the more we practice this alignment, the more we develop this skill. You notice something there about your hip. You notice something about when you leant back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it felt better to breathe there. Then we know these things about how we show up in that physical shape.
Yeah.
Right? Those then can inform our life or how we interact with life, right? Do I notice these things when I'm in that meeting?
And then if you notice these things, like if you notice that you're starting to sort of lean forward, then thinking, okay, maybe if I just sit back for a moment here, I can take a deep breath, and that would be a lot more calming, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And then instead of trying to manage or control the situation in order to make it feel better as a concept, right? If that is better, then I will feel better. You could feel better with more information from your body or more sensation actually grounding you back here than trying to intellectually think your way out of the situation, right? There's more of you, even if it actually feels threatening or overwhelming. We can then come back to a lot more space here than just here.
Yeah.
Or if it's really like claws coming in and feeling really anxiety provoking, I think we can just, okay, I've got all this space to resource. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually that sort of, so you're saying that you can go back to sort of looking around in the orientation part, because, like you said, that's sort of looking behind you, and it's that safety, isn't it? Reassuring there's nothing behind you that's going to jump out at you. You're safe, and looking at. Funny enough, I did a run yesterday, and as part of my calming down, I made sure that I looked around.
Oh, cool.
I don't know, it kind of came quite instinctively. I don't know, but it came, the idea, I would never, I might have looked around, but actually it was quite nice to, sort of a nice way to sort of just to calm and part of my cool down. Look around, look up at the trees, look at the sky, and even look behind me.
Yeah, and that's how the practicality of this can be used or applied in many areas of your life. Yeah, so it's really usable in that sense, and it's not something drastic you have to implement, right? It's just a little tweak here and there.
So Shaun, thank you so much for one. I could talk to you for hours, so I might have to get you on and talk again. But before that, I know you have a few workshops that you run, and I know you do regular classes. How can people get in touch with you, and sort of what sort of work are you doing at the moment?
Yeah, so there'll be an events page on my website. So www.shaunbrookingcoaching.co.uk. And then there's always regular updates on workshops there. And my classes run regularly on a Tuesday, 8 a.m. and a Thursday, 6 p.m. UK time. And that's purely somatic based work. And we'll always start the session with what we did today, the orienting and the body scan. And then on the website, there's also information about booking a discovery call, and those calls are free for your first discovery call if you're unsure or want to find out more. And if you're a little bit, let's say, stuck on the fence with, is it my body, is it my mind type area, I'm very happy to have conversations with people and just point them in the right direction. Having a good set of other practitioners around me, like osteopaths, nutritionists, and who else? Talk therapists and coaches as well, that I can refer you to if I know you'll be a good fit for them, or that's something you need instead of a body-based type coaching experience. So yeah, that's pretty much how I run. And then hopefully in the future I'll have some programs going up specifically for things, and those will be running 6 to 8 weeks at a time.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Really great. So I'll make sure that I link everything up in the notes section so that people can get a hold of you easily. But thank you once again for being here. It's been really fascinating talking to you on all of these things, and I know for sure a lot of my audience will really, really take a lot out of this. So thank you once again.
Cool. You're so welcome. Thank you for having me on. And definitely the first of many, hopefully. I think we could have gone off on a lot of different topics there, which is great. And all the best for you and your business as well and your studies.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Cheers.